I'm Deacon Claude, and I want to welcome you to the beginning of, well, we're already into day 12 already. Some of us have had a chance to celebrate Eucharist. Some of us have had a chance to be here for the flag raising, and we all have a chance to be here now to hear this panel for our roundtable conversation this morning. You've heard Jonathan's credentials if you were here last evening, otherwise read them on the website. Kathy you're going to hear about later today when she does her keynote, and Duncan you'll hear all the gory details when he presents this afternoon. I just want to point out one small thing, and that is that at the registration desk there is an agenda for the day to give you a sense of what is happening. On the reverse side is a copy of Day 12 reflections that the bishops put together based on the Second Vatican document Dignitatis Humanae. So they've excerpted a portion for each day of the 12 days of the fortnight, given a bit of reflection. So it's a useful resource. But the only way you get the whole section, the whole system, is to come each of 12, 14 days, or go online. Today we're going to talk about what is truth? How do we get to truth? How do we determine what is truthful? And the way that we're going to begin this is by, I'm going to share with you an email that I received yesterday afternoon. And I shared it with each of the speakers last evening. And I said, I'd like to begin by helping us as a group make a response to this individual. Someone I don't know, but who obviously knows me, and wrote in, well, here's the letter. I told him I sent him an email back. I said I would share it in full without his name today, and that I would make the videotape available of our conversation about that, because what he expresses is very truly not only honest, but perhaps almost a majority in some circles kind of opinion. So let me read this. Deacon Claude, I am very concerned with the U.S. bishops' near daily comment that the U.S. government is attacking the church by requiring all employers to provide to all employees insurance that also covers birth control. I am also concerned that the Diocese of Rochester, and you in particular, have promoted the notion that the government is trying to destroy religious freedom. It is not the government. Instead, it is the church that is not providing their employees freedom of religion. Some church employees have their personal religious belief that may include birth control. The government is not on the attack. The church, instead, is the attacker on its employees. Rather than blaming the government, why doesn't the church just fire all employees that would take advantage of the birth control? In fact, why doesn't the church excommunicate all women and their spouses from the church that use birth control? What would parishioners do if the church did either of these steps? Why hasn't the church convinced all women that birth control is against church law? Does the church find it easier to blame the government, like all the Rush Limbaughs who are dividing this country? Are you assisting to divide this country? The government is not the problem. The church is confusing an issue that can't be solved. Please bring this letter and these issues at your conference. Margaret, I can see before they're even going to say a word, you're already expressing something. Why don't you get us started? And then we'll let them talk. Now, Jonathan has a plane to leave to catch. He has to leave by 11. So we need to be sensitive to, as he walks out of the room, it's perhaps not because he's disgusted with us, but he has a plane to catch. But Margaret, why don't you get us started?
Thank you, Deacon Claude. I don't know if I can articulate the emotions because it's an emotional issue, and that's why I'm hoping our panel will, bring down the emotional level and make it, educational. Because I'm here and I'm going to be taking copious notes because I'm going to my Tea Party meeting this evening and going to share what I hear here. Because what happens is, as an average citizen, I mean, all I have to do is say in my little group of people that I'm part of the Tea Party, and I'm immediately, labeled, say that I'm here, and I am too. It's religious freedom is #1 constitutional amendment. I mean, it's our first Bill of Rights. Our religious freedoms are. And so I'm here to hear what the panel has to say. And so I'm going to defer there. I'm seriously interested in the legal side of it. And I don't know your expertise. I got to hear Jonathan last night. So I know we are all interested to hear. So I'm going to...
So panel, roll out your credentials as you may feel needs to be rolled out.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
Because women go first. And I'm a woman. And I think, it's funny, I was looking through my file here last night, and I forgot about this. This was an op-ed piece that I had written in our local paper. It's called, "It's Not About Birth Control." It's not about birth control. I think that's the answer to that email that came in. It's not about birth control. It doesn't matter how much the media says, the cost of this contraceptive versus the cost of this contraceptive. This contraceptive is more effective when women use it accurately. This one requires co-pays. Now we are not going to have any co-pays. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. Birth control doesn't matter. It's not about birth control. It's about religious freedom. It's about the government, and the lawyer can talk about this more, it's about the government saying, you're Catholic enough, you get the exemption. You're not Catholic enough over here. Think about what this new HHS mandate will do in practice. I mean, Kyle can talk about the Establishment Clause and the violations here. But in practice, it means the government, the arm of the government bureaucrats can come into this redemptorist retreat house, go through the files, see who's been here on retreat, see how many of the employees are Catholic and how many of the employees are not, see how many of the overnight guests are Catholic and how many are not. Oops, Jonathan Tobin, he's Jewish. He goes in this column. At the end of the day, they'll probably say the Redemptorist Retreat House is Catholic enough because they primarily serve Catholics and they primarily employ Catholics. But then they're going to go down to Canandaigua and they're going to go down to St. Mary's School and they're going to count heads of the little kids. How many kids here are Catholic? How many kids here are of another faith? Should the government be reaching that far down into the business of the church? That's what's going to happen. That's what this is about. And then they're going to say to St. Mary's School, oops, you don't qualify for their exemption. You've got to violate your conscience and your church's teaching, and you've got to pay for things that your mission statement and your ethical principles say you don't believe in. What? That's what this is about. It's not about birth control. I'm sorry, I got off on a bit of a tangent there. But that's how I feel. I feel very passionately about that. I'm sorry. Did you want to jump in there?
My name's Kyle Duncan, and I'm a lawyer on the panel. I've been reading a book called How to Defend Your Faith Without Raising Your Voice. It's by a guy named Austin Ivory. I saw him interviewed in National Review, and he has started a group called Catholic Voices in England. And this was apparently, I hadn't followed him, this was apparently in anticipation of the Pope's visit to England, which occasioned some controversy for some reason. And the whole idea was how to engage people in dialogue, which sounds very squishy. And usually whenever anybody says to me, let's engage in dialogue, I assume that they don't want to listen to anything I say and just want to convince me that they're right. So, the first thing, when I see emails like this, we get emails like this at the Becket Fund all the time. I'm the general counsel of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. I'll be talking about the HHS mandate later. We get emails like this all the time. The first question I ask myself is, should I even respond to this email? Because this person is, maybe a little bit imbalanced. I ask myself, is this person actually trying to enter into dialogue with me? Probably the answer is no, in which case the right thing to do is, I seem to remember something in the Bible about casting your pearls before swine, lest they turn and tear you to pieces. So sometimes if you decide to enter into dialogue with someone like this, they may turn and tear you to pieces, which doesn't help anybody. But suppose they are. Suppose they really do want an answer to whatever they're asking. The founder of our organization is a wonderful lawyer named Seamus Hassan. Kevin Seamus Hassan, a wonderful lawyer who's had to withdraw from the Becket Fund for health reasons, but he's very inspiring to us all. And he would always say, when someone asks you a question, try to listen to what they're really asking you. All this stuff in here about why doesn't the church fire all the employees and da-da-da and all this stuff. You don't respond to that. Try to listen to what the guy is asking, assuming this is a guy, actually asking. This person seems to be asking about, he has a view of the church, the Catholic Church, as something that is imposing its views on people and trying to control people and trying to take away their freedom. It's a very, 12th century view of the church, of a church that is somehow exercising governmental power, which, everybody knows the church doesn't exercise governmental power. The church is a private organization. The church has the same rights as any other private organization to engage in public commentary and to try to persuade people that what it says is true. And it tries to propose to people truths about human sexuality, about what is good, about what is true, about what is beautiful, about how people should live in a way that helps them flourish. So this person has a completely wrong idea of what the church is and what its place is in our pluralistic, secular society. So maybe one place to start is to say, we have a basic inability, we have a basic breakdown in communication about what we're talking about. You're talking about someone who is trying to take away rights, trying to control people. But the way we see it, if you're speaking as a Catholic, I'm a Catholic. I'm a convert to the church, so I'm one of these really out there Catholics. I love what the church teaches on contraception. I think it's beautiful and wonderful. And one sort of important magnetic thing from the church that attracted my wife and I to the church. So if you're talking to somebody who's a Catholic, you might say, look, the church is not trying to control anybody. The church is just proposing truth. You don't have to listen to it. You don't have to work for a church organization. The church isn't going to do anything to you if you don't agree with the church. But the church and a church school or a hospital or a charity or even individuals have the right and the obligation to enter into public conversation with people. And that's all the church is trying to do here. The only party in this conversation that's trying to impose anything on anybody is, of course, the government. Right? Because the government has the power to take your liberty away. The government has the power to fine you if you don't fall into line with what it wants you to do. It's the government that we should be worried about imposing its view on people, not the church. So, that's maybe one way to reorient the conversation at the beginning. Look, I'll tell you, we try never even to say contraception when we're talking about this issue. It's not because I personally don't want to talk about contraception. I love to talk with people about contraception because they have no earthly idea what to say to me. When I say, contraception, I don't like contraception, neither does my wife, and I love what the church teaches about contraception. Would you like to know more about that? Right, then the conversation stops. But we, at the Beckett Fund, we are about religious liberty. We don't want to talk about contraception. Because if you disagree with our clients on their view of contraception, so what? We have a pluralistic society. People have different views. Some people think that's a good thing, and that it adds to the richness of our society.
Freedom of choice.
Yeah, some people think you should be able to choose all sorts of things. Well, how about choosing to live the traditional Christian ethic about human sexuality? All the people in the church, or the church organizations, or our clients, EWTN for instance, all they want to do is continue to be able to live out those truths without being fined. So maybe that's one way of trying to reorient the conversation. I'm not sure if this is what we're supposed to be talking about on this panel, but that was my reaction to this very misguided email. I'll throw it over. Jonathan, do you want
Thanks. Obviously, those of you who heard me speak last night know that obviously I disagree with the thrust of this email, and that I think it is obviously the church that is under fire, and that it is not the medieval church trying to hold some sort of inquisition of non-believers, but is itself, its own freedom is at stake. How do we respond to emails like that? How do, as a journalist, I open up my email every morning, including this morning. I maybe could have given it a pass, and I see emails like that every day or worse. I've learned over the years that sometimes the worst thing you could do to somebody like that is just send them a very polite, short note. Thank you for writing and sharing your views. That tends to drive them crazy. We spoke of casting pearls before swine. I'm sometimes, on a more secular example of, when sometimes you don't want to engage with people who don't really aren't interested in engaging with you. The famous conductor and composer Richard Strauss once wrote a short piece called The 10 Commandments of Conducting an Orchestra, and the 8th commandment was never look at the trombones. It only encourages them. I'm often reminded of that when dealing with readers. It only encourages them. Once you start answering, provocative, bait and switch questions like that, it never ends. However, much more interesting and much more important for us is to discuss where do those views come from, and where do you? If I'll segue back to sort of what our topic of where do we find the truth. There, if all you read, we were discussing this last night, if all you read was sort of the liberal mainstream media, it might be understandable to come to the point of view that it is the church that is the aggressor in this problem and not the government. So what does the helpless American citizen do about that? Well, the answer is that we're not helpless. That there's more to the media than just the few the liberal-oriented networks and the big mainstream newspapers. There's a vast world of information out there, of alternative views, of conservative views, of views that run the spectrum. Your problem as a reader, as an informed citizen, as a citizen who wants to become informed, is like, okay, so where do I turn? What do I do? Now, the most important skill that I think any of us can develop in our quest to be informed citizens is something, I don't know if they even teach it in the schools anymore, it's learning to read critically. In other words, looking at a source and saying, okay, I know it's saying ABC, this is what they're trying to tell me, but why are they telling me this? What are the sources that this article or this newspaper, that broadcast, what are their sources? And evaluate. I think it's very important to read as much as possible, including the liberal mainstream media. I've spent more time probably, if you total up all the topics in the last 20 years, the things that I've written about, I've written, just endless commentaries about the bias of the New York Times. I'm a public enemy number one. They actually once asked me to write for them last year, and I was shocked because I figured I was totally on the enemies list. But the fact is, even though there's something to criticize there every day, I mean, their bias is so thorough throughout the news section, even their sports section is biased.
Yes.
Don't get me started on that. That's not really what we're talking about. But I read it every day. And not just because I get paid to read a lot of media and to be able to evaluate it. I read it every day because it is a source of information. Because it tells me not only what the other side is thinking, but what their arguments are and what their sources are. And there's truth even in there. You can evaluate it, you can see it, you compare it to other things. There are other newspapers. Read the Wall Street Journal. Read the Weekly Standard, read National Review, even read commentarymagazine.com. There's a world out there full of information. There are aggregator sites. You want to go to something, you want to know what informed members of the media look to every morning? It's called realclearpolitics.com. Everybody in the media reads it. It is the best aggregation site of the top opinion, liberal and conservative. Dueling pieces on the same thing. The most informed, best writers get put up there. And it has, actually, I'll give them a little commercial. It has sites within its website, Real Clear World, about foreign affairs, Real Clear Religion, which deals with religious issues every day. I don't happen to think that is as strong as their politics, but my message is read. Think. Don't isolate yourself. It's very discouraging to me, and I say this as a conservative, as a convinced conservative, as a conservative writer and editor. It's not good for this country that we are evolving into this bifurcated media audience thing, where you are either somebody who reads the New York Times and listens to NPR and watches MSNBC, or you're somebody who reads the Wall Street Journal or National Review and watches Fox and listens to Rush Limbaugh. Because then both sides are living in echo chambers, and we're just agreeing with each other, and we're just listening to our own side. You don't learn that way. You don't get challenged that way. The person who read that email only listens and reads to one side. You don't want to be that way on the other side, because then you are not going to be, if part of the purpose of this fortnight of freedom, all these gatherings, is to help you learn to be a more effective advocate for your cause and to build your cause so that you can really convince people and build up a critical mass of opinion in this country that will defend the right of religious freedom. Then you have to read what the other side is saying. You have to read it all. You have to get informed. You have to engage with the other side. There's some things when President Obama said he wanted to engage with Iran, that wasn't necessarily a good thing, because it just meant he wanted to give them what they wanted. But you do have to engage with the other side in political debate, because otherwise you're flying blind. And you are not going to understand your own position, and you're not going to convince somebody on the other side. So read, think, read critically. As an editor, somebody who edited newspapers, what do you tell your reporters? You say, what are your sources? Check your sources. Evaluate them. Compare them to other things. That's what you have to do. Now, it's not hard work. It's not like just going to a movie, you sit down in the theater, and you're entertained. Well, I said this last night. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. This isn't just sitting down on your couch and watching TV. This is getting involved. This is rolling up your sleeves and doing some hard work. But if you're serious about these issues, if you're serious about defending the institution of the church, defending religious freedom, then that's what you've got to do.
Let me just add to that. I once heard a famous syndicated columnist, Joseph Sobrin, once said, every day I get up and with my morning coffee, I read the New York Times and the Holy Bible, and that way I get both sides of the story. A great line, but exactly what Jonathan is saying.
Just a quick comment. I think that that's a great idea, because a lot of people will say, well, you'll often say, well, why don't you look at this and that from our side? And they say, well, I don't think that you know what this person has said, or you probably haven't read this or that. And if you can say, oh yeah, I've read that, and I read this, and I know what so-and-so said, and you can quote back to them things on their side, and you say, but I wonder if you have read such and such, they might stand there a little bit dumbfounded, seeing that you are well read on both sides, and that maybe they aren't. And that may make them feel a little bit awkward in thinking that, well, perhaps they should read on this side too.
I think it's very important to go to primary documents too, to primary sources, Go read the U.S. Bishop's Statement on Faithful Citizenship. Read the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. Read the encyclicals and the pastoral statements of the bishops. Don't just take somebody's summary of them. And definitely don't believe everything you read online or everything you read in a pro-life email thread. Because believe me, as one whose inbox is full of pro-life email threads, the news somehow gets distorted, and by the time it reaches some people out there, it's wrong. It's just inaccurate information. So you can't always believe everything that's out there. I once actually had an email sent to me. A woman sent me a story, and I can't even remember what it was. It was about an end-of-life issue. But it actually, the original source of her story, which she believed and sent around all over the place on her email lists, the original source was The Onion. The Onion is a satirical website that parodies the news. She fully believed it and sent it around to her email lists. You have to be very cautious when you get things on email lists. And you have to go to the primary source, not the secondary or the tertiary source, the primary source. The other thing I would say, as a representative of the New York State Catholic Bishops' Conference, there's a lot of groups out there that call themselves Catholic. They're not all Catholic. Don't believe them all just because they have Catholic in the head of their organization's name. We all remember Catholics for a Free Choice, right? Well, that wasn't really Catholic. And now we have groups like Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good, which is clearly a left-leaning political organization that worked to get healthcare reform enacted, that worked for the Obama re-election campaign. But we also have groups out there like Catholic Vote. I think it's called the Catholic Vote, which is aligned with right-wing politics and trying to get Republicans elected. We have to be very cautious because as church, I always like to say, we are politically homeless. We don't fit neatly into the left side or the right side, the Republican or Democratic Party. We don't. If you look at the church's agenda, it's a very broad agenda of issues and people, all of them with human life and human dignity that we respect. And you can't label us or fit us neatly into Republican left or right politics, and you shouldn't. Now, as individuals, I would say to anybody, the woman in the back who's affiliated with the Tea Party, you go, girl. You can do whatever you want as individuals, and you're encouraged by your church to get involved in political parties and run for office if you want. Go for it. But as church, you have to be very cautious of what St. Mary's Church in Canandaigua puts into the bulletin in terms of candidates. You can't do that. You have to be very cautious about that line. We can say and do anything we want about issues like religious liberty and religious freedom. We can't say or do anything we want about political candidates.
Question, then I wanted to talk about some more specific sources for this, but we'll look at you first and then I'll go back to you.
I would bring up an answer to Deacon's emailer, the Declaration of Independence. We all know they talked in a long list of injuries and usurpations inflicted on the colonies by King George, who was the government, right? Let me read just one of those. It says here, he, King George, has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Well, if you think we're inflicted with that now, wait till you get Obamacare working. There's going to be a huge amount of freedoms taken away from us with the laying on of 16,000 IRS agents just for openers. So I would respond to you and say, read the Declaration of Independence.
Well, I think we can stipulate that Thomas Jefferson did not foresee Obamacare when he was writing. He might have decided to lay down his pen early. Yes?
I wanted to ask a question. I had heard you talking about the, check your sources and be cautious and this type of thing. I had heard, and this I'd like because of your legal counsel type of thing, is that the fact that the church could not speak from the pulpit started with the Johnson administration.
There's something called, that people call the Johnson Amendment. That was an amendment to the Internal Revenue Code that was aimed at preventing certain political activities in nonprofits. As applied to churches, yes, that does have certain definite impacts on what churches can, what a minister can say from the pulpit, or what kind of political activities the church can host or participate in. It doesn't cut them off from politics altogether, but it requires them to be cautious about.
My understanding is that it's not a law.
Well, no, it is a law.
It is a law?
It is a law. Yes, it is, and it's one of those scary laws that can be enforced by the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay.
Yeah, and what it would risk, for starters, is the loss of tax exempt status by any nonprofit, any 501c3, but in what we're talking about here is particularly churches or other religious organizations. Now, I have to say, if you read the Johnson Amendment and the guidelines put out by the Internal Revenue Service, they are not a model of clarity. In fact, one might reasonably say that they themselves run afoul of the guarantees of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, the Constitution. However, that has not been tested in court, and it is difficult to figure out how to get a test for that in court. But what the law is right now is basically what Kathy said. You have to be very cautious about. You can talk about issues, right? You can talk about important issues of religious freedom. Your priest or pastor can get up in the pulpit and rail against the HHS mandate. And I'm in the Diocese of Arlington, and I've heard several very pointed sermons against the HHS mandate. That doesn't violate the law. What violates the law is when a church or a synagogue or a mosque or whatever intervenes in a political campaign, right? Now, what that means is very difficult to tell sometimes. But they can't get up from the pulpit and say, vote for Jim. I like Jim's platform. They can't do that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Then how come we don't have any concern when Mr. Obama or Mr. Clinton can go to a Baptist church and say, vote for me?
I have no answer to that. We lots of have a lot of concern about that.
I think it's time we took the bull by the horns and be a little bit more
I mean, it
offensive.
applies evenly to whatever political platform it applies to liberals and conservatives.
Well, there certainly does seem to be a double standard.
There is.
That's correct. My answer to that is that the Catholic Church is a bigger target. We have a lot more to lose. When you look at the system that we have built with Catholic schools and Catholic hospitals and Catholic charitable organizations, we have a lot to lose, and they know that. We're a bigger target, and we can be sued and lose everything.
It seems to me this is, a fine line that's been drawn here, and we really haven't tested it. For example, you go to church down south, which I tend to do in the winter. It's beautiful here this time of year, but not in the winter for me. And when you hear the homilies down south, they don't cut to the chase. They state you can't vote for a pro-abortion candidate. Now, they don't name people, but they certainly draw that line, and they're very specific, and I don't see anything wrong with that.
I'll just, these are issues that cut across all of our faiths, and there's no question that there are certain double standards. It is inner city churches are a a normal campaign stop for Democratic candidates. I live outside of Philadelphia, and that's how you mobilize a lot of the urban vote. That's not right. You're right. It's not right. But as I was saying last night when we were talking about media bias, well, life isn't always fair. And it also means, I happen to, as speaking as a conservative, I don't think it is appropriate, even as a person of faith, someone who regularly attends synagogue, I don't want to hear my rabbi getting up in a sermon and telling me how to vote. I don't want to hear him, I don't want to hear that at all. And I don't care if he's going to tell me to vote how I would have voted anyway. It's not appropriate. It's not personally what I go to synagogue for. In fact, it's what I go to synagogue to escape from. But so you have to speak up. I was speaking over breakfast. There was a big controversy in Florida last month where Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's the current chair of the Democratic National Committee, was invited to speak at a synagogue at a Friday night service where she was going to basically give a campaign speech. And some members of that synagogue just raised holy hell over that. And then Wasserman Schultz was disinvited, and then liberals were saying that the synagogue was responding to bullies. And we got into this whole inverse, this crazy inverse debate about who was bullying whom. And you know what? The bottom line is that there is plenty of room for discussion of issues, of ideas. I mean, I write for a magazine that is itself run by a foundation that is a nonprofit foundation, and we do not endorse candidates. We are not Republicans or Democrats, but we are about the struggle of ideas, the struggle of issues. And I don't find that a hard line to walk. And it's not hard for the church either. And we have to not look to the bad examples, because every time there's a new president and a new Justice Department and new political appointees at the IRS, I have to tell you something, a different set of people get warning letters. My magazine got a warning letter in 2009. Basically, a shot was fired over our bow, and we had to have our lawyer, one of the lawyers on our board, fortunately we didn't have to pay him because he's on our board, to basically go through and deal with that and fire a lawyer letter back, and we were fine. But every time there's a new president, there tends to be a new set of letters out there. That's the way the political system works. It doesn't mean it's fair. But again, the fact that the world isn't fair shouldn't so distort you and so motivate you that that's all you're thinking about. Don't get distracted by this stuff. I mean this seriously. Okay, yeah, it's wrong. You've got other things to worry about. You've got other issues to advocate. This question of where, lines, you can live within it and put forward your side very easily. And if you get too caught up in these side issues about basically, talking to yourself about how the world isn't fair, well, when you're talking to yourself about how the world isn't fair, you're not convincing anyone, especially yourself.
Sure, I guess we should just take questions, and then I'm going to try to work in some specifics about religious freedom in my sources. But go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to what you said about read critically. That was something that I missed growing up. So I believe everything. So I just can embrace. I can see where it's wrong. I can see some things, of course, where it's wrong, etc. But how do you teach yourself to read critically? What can you do? I heard your question about check sources, etc. But what are some other things? How can you train yourself?
Well, I guess it's sort of, you have to read an article as if you were the editor. As if someone submitted this to you and said, can this be run? Can we publish this piece? So as an editor, you go through it and you say, okay, what's the point of this story? Is the argument backed up? Can you prove it? What are your sources for this? Are these credible sources? Is it logical? Why why does someone want me to believe this? Whose agenda is being put forward here? Now again, that may seem a little abstract to you, but do it as an exercise every day with the things that you read. And you'll start understanding that it's like you'll break the code. As when we try to teach kids to read, we want to help them break the code. So you'll break the code. It's very easy. It's actually incredibly simple. Just say, okay, what does this guy want me to think? What has he got behind it? What has he got to tell me this? What's the point? Who's behind it? Why? Does it make sense? Is the other side acknowledged? Is there another point of view about this? Is that acknowledged? Is it answered, or is it ignored? All of a sudden, you're seeing, it's everything. Once you look at an article like that, as I said, read it like an editor, like a good editor, and it becomes very transparent. It becomes like when it's if you look on the Word, when you're writing a document in Word, on your computer, and you hit reveal codes, which shows all the commands like paragraph and all that. If you do this exercise every day, you'll be seeing the reveal codes in any article. And it helps you to read it. It helps you not to get upset by the liberal media, because you can see it. It's every Sunday on the New York Times for a couple of months. It's a big story. They were getting these incredible breakthrough stories about what the government is really thinking. These senior administration officials, senior Defense Department officials were telling you this incredible inside stuff about our cyber warfare attacks on Iran and a whole host of other issues. And it's like, if you're reading that like an editor, you're saying, gosh, this is what Barack Obama wants me to think. Because I know as a journalist, when I see senior administration official, that means the head of whatever department is being quoted. That means the secretary of, you name it. Senior White House official means the chief of staff or higher. So it's all open. It's really, it's not some secret handshake. It's all open for you.
Let's have and just to add on to that, I predict that, and I'm saying this because I've already seen one story, that you will start seeing stories in the media that propose to reveal exactly how the justices changed their votes in the Obamacare decision. And I encourage you to read them. I've read the one that I've seen already that's put out by a very prominent Supreme Court reporter. I saw it on abcnews.com. It's being passed around. I'm reading that. I'm very interested in it because I've read the opinion and I'm very interested in the dynamics of the court. It's a very surprising opinion, as I'll talk about later today. But I'm reading that with a jaundiced eye because the Supreme Court, there are no leaks that come out of the Supreme Court. It doesn't mean the story's not true. But I am asking myself, and I'm not a journalist, so Jonathan knows this a lot better than I do, but I'm asking myself, what are her sources? It's probably not law clerks, because the law clerks on the Supreme Court know that if they talk out of school, their career is going to be over. Believe me, you do not want a Supreme Court justice calling up a potential employer and saying, this is a smart guy. He talks when he shouldn't talk, so you probably shouldn't hire him. You're not going to get a job. Right? You will be the attorney for the dog catcher back home, general counsel for the Humane Society of some very, very small town. You will not be working for the big law firm. And yet, this major Supreme Court reporter is publishing stories, and it sounds like she's talking to people who know. So use that as an exercise in critical thinking. Why is this story coming out right now? I mean, one subtext of the story is there's great division among the conservative justices. Maybe that's the point of the story, to sow discord and confusion and discouragement among conservatives, because the conservative champion, Chief Justice Roberts, may have switched his vote for political, I don't know if he did that. I have great respect for Chief Justice Roberts, notwithstanding that decision. I don't like that decision. But it's used as an exercise in critical thinking. I don't believe what I read typically. I try to train myself not to believe even things from my friends. Sometimes I get things from my friends or people who I want to agree with and who want to agree with me, and I read it and think, well, you know, my friend might be a little bit off on this. Maybe I can help my friend sort of have a more nuanced, accurate view of things. And that's what I'm going to try to do this afternoon, is try to help you have a more sort of critical, accurate, nuanced view of what's going on with the HHS mandate. Because if you want to fight against it, you probably should have a better understanding of what it actually is. You know, the jackbooted thugs from the federal government, and this is me just being satirical, are probably not going to break down our doors next week and demand the payment for contraceptives, right? That's probably not going to happen. If you think that that's what's going to happen, you're not in a good position to fight against it. What's going to happen is much more subtle.
I believe what you're saying now.
Okay, good. I want you to go to the Becker website.
I have a question for Ms. Gallagher. What would you think, Ms. Gallagher, of the bishops and the priests not taking advantage of teaching moments when our prominent public Catholic politicians promote abortion and publicly receive the sacraments, and the bishops and the priests back off or are silent? What's your opinion on that?
Well, look, I work for the bishops. I represent them. I have for 28 years. I think that a lot of things are done quietly and behind closed doors that we are not privy to. I will say publicly that I live in the Albany Diocese. Bishop Hubbard gets a very bad rap from pro-life people who think he's not pro-life enough and he doesn't speak out enough about it. I remember very, very vividly a meeting behind closed doors with the elder Cuomo, Mario, Bishop Hubbard and Mario Cuomo going at it like you wouldn't believe about Medicaid funding of abortion. I have seen things that others have not seen. And I don't know what goes on behind closed doors when I'm not there between bishops and priests and politicians. So I'm not going to denounce all of them for not excommunicating or not doing more to speak from the pulpit. Do I think sometimes the church makes PR mistakes? Yeah. Yeah, they do. I mean, let me speak for a minute about the war on women, which I take great offense to, because it is a lie, it is an untruth that has been perpetrated by politicians and by the media and by Rush Limbaugh, as Jonathan said last night, but it has gained steam and momentum out there. And not only is the Republican Party being accused of waging a war on women, but the Catholic Church is being accused of waging a war on women. Anybody who takes the time to read the Church's documents can see that the Catholic Church has been progressive in terms of women's rights. Read the 1995 letter from Blessed John Paul II about women, his letter to women, about the feminine genius, about denouncing sexual exploitation, discrimination, sexism against women, and pushing and promoting progressive policies like equal pay for equal work and family and medical leave for working moms. I mean, all this stuff that the church has come out there swinging for women. Do we ever hear about that? Do we ever see that on Katie Couric's evening news? Oh, she doesn't do the evening news anymore. We never hear about the good things that the church is doing for women. So we have to be the ones sometimes out there planting the seeds of truth and letting people know that our church says these things about women and about women's rights. However, having said all of that, you know, in the midst of this swirling, waging war on women, was it good for the bishops to come out and say, we're doing an investigation of the Girl Scouts? No, probably not the best timing for the church to do that. Not even the best timing to release a report about their investigation on religious sisters. Not good timing. When the bishops testified before Congress on the contraceptive coverage of the HHS mandate, was it good to have all clerical collars and suits sitting behind a desk like this? Do you think maybe there should have been a woman or two up there? Yeah, there should have been. So sometimes the church doesn't take advantage of moments when it should, and does kind of make PR errors in that way. But is no war on women. In fact, we are the ones promoting women. And I think women, oh, one more thing I have to tell you. Go to a website. It's called womenspeakforthemselves.com. Womenspeakforthemselves.com. All you women out there, if you haven't signed it, there's a wonderful letter there, an open letter to President Obama and Catherine Sebelius. The website was put together by Helen Alvarez, who's a lawyer and a professor at George Mason University, who used to be the spokesperson for the U.S. bishops. And it's just signed, last time I looked was a couple of months ago, and it was signed by like 30,000 women across the country, who basically say, hey, you, the administration, do not speak for all women. We're here to say we love our church's teachings. We believe in what the church says about human sexuality and contraception and abortion. We believe it and we live it. So go to that website, all you women out there, and sign it.
So would you folks agree with the statement that the truth is harder and harder to ascertain these days? In other words, to find the truth. It is there.
I don't know that I would accept that as a general statement of fact. What our problem today is that it's sort of a side effect of something that's very good. It used to be that the media really was a monopoly, or was as close, the national media was as close to a monopoly. It was this, 3 networks which had pretty much the same sort of mainstream liberal orientation. If you wanted to know the news, you had to, you watched at 6 or 6:30 every night, and it was these 3 guys telling you pretty much from the same frame of reference. The national newspapers were all pretty much from one point of view, and there wasn't a lot of there was a lot of frustration for conservatives because they were shut out of much of the media. But that changed in the last 25 years. Talk radio, that's the genius of the market. Talk radio developed because it was a vacuum, because it was a vast market not being served that was frustrated with the liberal mainstream media. Fox News, which for a lot of conservatives isn't conservative enough these days, that's what they tell me, it was created because there was room for another point of view. And there are other newspapers with a whole spate of opinion magazines. Bill Buckley founded National Review in the 1950s, because for conservatives to stand athwart history and say stop. And National Review helped change the world. It helped change the minds of thousands, inspired generations of young journalists. It's where I started. It's where I started as a youngster reading National Review, watching Bill Buckley on TV. It isn't, but with this internet, this great democratization of the media, where it's not just a few gatekeepers, is that there's a lot of other information out there, and it's everything. Don't believe everything you read on the web. Don't believe every crazy email you get. Use the same critical reading skills that I referred to before. It applies to everything, and it works. The truth is out there. It was always hard sometimes to get at, and speaking as a journalist, sometimes it can be very hard because there are lots of people working not to obscure it. But it's no harder now to ascertain. It's a different kind of work. Again, I'll say it again. What we're talking about is work. It's not sitting back and watching somebody else do it and saying, yay, good day for our team. It's not a spectator.
We're going to pause long enough to let Jonathan leave, but first to thank him for his call.
I don't know how you were walking away, but I walk away very much inspired by meeting all of you and listening to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Very nice.
How can we get this panel? How can we get it?
You can go to commentary.magazine.com.
Commentary magazine.
COMMENTARY magazine. We couldn't get the commentary.com because some guy in China bought it 20 years ago and won't sell it to us. CommentaryMagazine.com. And you can read, other than days like today when I'm on vacation with you, you can see me and really great writers every day. Thanks very much.
By any chance, can I have the letter back that I sent?
We're supposed to go into shift gears for a second, although we continue to take questions. You know, I'm here, and I'll talk at 1:30 about this, about the HHS mandate and about the litigation that is ongoing right now. Litigation that was, by the way, not affected at all by the Obamacare decision last week, which had nothing to do with the HHS mandate. So I'm going to try to shed some light on that later today. But there are a number of sources out there on the internet for people who want to be more informed about not only the HHS mandate and the litigation, but also about the larger issues of American religious liberty, our traditions of religious liberty in this country, our system of government. There are a number of sources out there that are very instructive for people. You know, and I'll be honest with you, I mean, they're mostly conservative sort of places to go on the internet. I personally think, I mean, I've been a lawyer and a law professor, and you know, I've got my own views about things, but these kinds of places are trustworthy. They're giving you accurate information. They're not paranoid websites. So, for instance, if you want information, sort of, let's say about the general background of the HHS mandate, for instance, the USCCB has a very good website called fortnightforfreedom.org, Fortnight for Freedom. The 4 in there is the number 4. I should have had these, but if you Google that, you can find it. It's a very good website. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. has a very good website called sacredproperty.com. Sacredproperty.com. You've got a quote from James Madison up in here somewhere that talks about conscience being the most sacred property. The Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., of course, recently filed a lawsuit against the administration, along with Notre Dame and 42 other Catholic organizations. You know, also a place like the Heritage Foundation. If you go, that's a very, very good organization. I speak there often. It's very informative. Sure, it's conservative, but it is from a really, they look at these questions very rigorously, and they have a portion of their website that's dedicated to religious freedom. They have a religious freedom sort of project ongoing there right now. So Heritage, that's just heritage.org. There's another organization you may not have heard of. It's very good, Washington, D.C. It's called the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Ethics and Public Policy Center, which is a think tank. That's EPPC, EPPC.org. A lot of great information there. Super smart. People like Ed Whalen, who writes for National Review, talks about the law. And you will be really informed if you read these people. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention the Beckett Fund, right, which is under the General Counsel of the Beckett Fund. What we try to do at the Beckett Fund, which is beckettfund.org, Beckett Fund is in Thomas Beckett, so B-E-C-K-E-T. We have tried to position our website as kind of information central on the HHS mandate litigation. So we include a map, the entire country that has all of the lawsuits that have been filed, and it's interactive. You can click on each one and see who the plaintiffs are, who the law firms are. You know, you can get links to the actual complaints. You can read the briefing. You can. It's a very big production that we put together. We're very proud of it. And so if you go, you can see there's a great deal of information. You can, for instance, where I would start on that is just go to our FAQs on the HHS litigation. That will tell you a great deal of what you need to know. You will be far more informed than the average person about this issue. Some other sites, the Alliance Defense Fund is another nonprofit organization. It's called ADF, Alliance Defense Fund. They brought some lawsuits. They're very good. EWTN has a great website. EWTN is our client. We represent them in this litigation. Very close to my heart because EWTN was sort of an instrument in me coming into the Catholic Church. And it's a great, it's somewhat intimidating to represent them in litigation. One doesn't want to fail. I had a funny story. I had to go and address the board because we filed a lawsuit. So on the board are figures such as Archbishop Chaput, Archbishop Gomez, and a bunch of other people who I had seen on television a lot. And so I found myself in the room addressing them, and I felt not quite equal to the task. But I was able to go to confession to several of them later. ask for their forgiveness. So that's just a start. One last one that I really like. There's an organization in D.C. called the Catholic Information Center. The Catholic Information Center. Fantastic place. It's run by Opus Dei. And they have a website, cicdc.org. And there's a button on that website that talks about the mandate. Very, very well informed. I've spoken there. And it's a wonderful organization. So Kathy may have some.
Yeah, just let me add a few on to that because he stole a number of mine. It's okay, go to confession. Stealing. Just a few more that might seem obvious to you, but I represent the New York State Catholic Conference, so nyscatholic.org. nyscatholic.org. Earlier this year, we revamped and updated our website. There's a lot of information there. You just have to surf around a lot. And the USCCB, usccb.org, obviously has a lot of information. And both of us, the New York Catholic Conference and the U.S. Catholic Conference, have action centers where you can very easily email your elected representatives in Washington and in Albany. 15 years ago, I used to go to sessions like this, and I used to bring loose leaf paper and pens and envelopes and stamps, and I would make people write to their elected officials, and I'd take them out to the mailbox when the day was over. It's not that hard anymore. It's a few clicks of your mouse. The letters are pretty much written for you. You can edit them if you wish and put it in your own words, which is always a really good thing to do. But it's very simple to take that step of getting involved in advocacy and communicating with your elected officials. Really, nobody's reading paper anymore. They're afraid of envelopes because they're afraid they're going to have anthrax in them. They're fax machines. Nobody's using fax machines anymore, so you might as well email through our websites. Catholic newspapers, I probably read more Catholic newspapers than anyone in the country. It's just an obsession of mine. It's ridiculous. Two that I highly recommend, our Sunday Visitor, I think is a great national Catholic newspaper, and National Catholic Register also, which is, I think I saw a pile of them out on a table out there, which is another great publication. And you can trust the accuracy in those two publications. I can't say that about all Catholic newspapers. I would also give a shout out to the Catholic Courier here in the Diocese of Rochester, which has an excellent website. Very current, very up to date, and a lot of news on there. But I can't say that about all of the 8 dioceses in New York. I better be careful what I say because this is on tape. Okay, the Sirius Radio, the Catholic channel, another great source of information.
You got an attorney.
I got an attorney, that's right.
We don't represent them.
Another client. The Sirius Radio, the Catholic channel is a great source. The Catholic News Agency, CNA, CatholicNewsAgency.com is another great source. And finally, I would say, people during an election season often call my office and they say, can you tell me where this candidate stands on the HHS mandate? Can you tell me where this politician stands on abortion? There is a website called ontheissues.org. It's not affiliated with the Catholic Church. I don't even know who runs it. Are you familiar with that? ontheissues.org. And at least at the federal level, you can click on New York State and get all of the elected officials who are currently in office. I'm not sure they do candidates, but all the ones who are currently in office and running for re-election. And they give you a whole slew of categories such as abortion, war, welfare, poverty, immigration, civil rights, healthcare, education, and they'll show you the voting records of these politicians and also speeches that they've given where they've said things about these topics. So it's a great source. It's not as hard as it used to be in terms of getting information about where a particular candidate stands. The internet has made it a little easier, but again, you can't trust everything you read on the internet. But on theissues.org, I have found to be accurate and helpful.
I'd like to call your attention to one other thing. You will often hear it said that religious freedom is under an unusual assault right now. And we happen to think that's true. But the problem is that it's easy to say that. It's not so easy to come up with examples of it. So if you go to the Beckett Fund website, you will see a document that we put out in conjunction with a wonderful movement called the American Religious Freedom Project. The American Religious Freedom Project. This is something that was started about, I guess, 8-9 months ago in Washington, D.C. It's in conjunction with Beckett Fund and with the Ethics and Public Policy Center. At the launch of the ARFP, Senator Lieberman was the keynote speaker. He gave a very inspiring talk about religious freedom. But the document that we came up with ARFP is called The Top 10 Threats to Religious Freedom. And it's a 2-page document. It's very easy to understand. And so it goes over things like not only the HHS mandate, which everybody knows about and most people know about, but things like things that people may not have heard about, such as the fact that the current administration cut the bishops, the Catholic bishops, out from a human trafficking grant. Has anybody heard about this?
Yes. Yes.
So the human trafficking grant is designed to give money to organizations who help victims of human trafficking, right? Something that one would think we could all agree is a good thing, right? And the bishops' organization had a very good track record in helping victims. These are women who were victims of modern slavery, essentially. But they were recently cut out of the grant. Why were they cut out of the grant? They wouldn't refer victims of human trafficking for abortion. Right, so they were cut out of the grant. And we identify that as a real threat to religious freedom on a number of different levels. It's appalling to start with that kind of condition would be attached to a grant. That you have to include abortion services in the aid that you give to victims, as if there are no other ways of helping them. But the other thing is that it tends to, it directly marginalizes a religious organization's ability to participate in the common good, right? By saying, well, you have to give up this core principle if you want to participate in the common good. And you'll hear people say all the time, "Oh, well, if you don't want the money, you don't have to take the money." Well, that's exactly backwards, right? The reason that money is given out that way is so that groups like Catholic groups can contribute to the common good in their own unique way. Presumably they do a good job, right? And so it seems like a completely backwards public policy to attach conditions to grants like that that are designed to drive them out of the public square. Same thing could be said for the adoption issue of driving out Catholic adoption agencies because they're not willing to place children with same-sex couples, right? That is the message there is you will not play anymore in the public square because you don't agree with our moral vision for the world.
Well, Kyle, being a whore, one of the speakers earlier said, why didn't the Catholic Church fight that? And the bishops fight that in Massachusetts?
I don't know the answer to that. I've asked myself that as well. I don't know. Maybe there's no way of fighting it. I don't know.
It's not just Massachusetts. Illinois
Yeah,
had to go out of
right.
business. Washington, D.C., I think.
Yeah, Mass.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know. I've asked myself that.
It's going to happen more and more. Last month, I don't even know if you're aware of this, Mr. Attorney, but last month, a lesbian employee of a Catholic hospital in Westchester, New York.
You mean
Did you
St.
hear about
Joseph's?
this? Yeah, St. Joseph's.
Yes.
He's a good
We're trying to get involved in this.
Oh, really?
Yes.
She has sued the Catholic employer, St. Joseph's Hospital, for not providing health coverage benefits to her legal spouse because they got married under New York's gay marriage law. But it's a federal lawsuit. I'm not an attorney, so correct me if I get this wrong. But it's a federal lawsuit challenging DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, at the federal level, saying if DOMA wasn't there, they would have full rights to be married and have full health benefits from a Catholic employer in New York State, which we said at the state level to Governor Andrew Cuomo, Your religious protection in this bill is not good enough. It's not going to help our Catholic employers. And he said, oh, sure it is. Well, this lawsuit pretty much shows him to be a liar, to be untruthful, because that Catholic employer, if DOMA falls, would be forced to provide those health benefits to legally married gay spouses.
Right, and so as many of you may, I mean, it gets very complicated, but as a matter of federal law defines marriage as between a man and a woman. Right? It is called the Defense of Marriage Act. It defines marriage as a matter of federal law. Right? It also says that states don't have to recognize other states' same-sex marriages. That's a different part of DOMA. But this part of DOMA has already been declared unconstitutional by the First Circuit Court of Appeals, Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. The federal government refused to even defend it. And so the House of Representatives had to hire a fantastic lawyer named Paul Clement, who's one of the best attorneys in the country. He lost the Obamacare case, but it wasn't because he's not the best attorney in the country. It's for other reasons, but he's a fantastic attorney. And his law firm is defending DOMA in those cases, defending the government, essentially doing what the government should be doing. That case they've already filed a petition for the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's going to take that case. So the Supreme Court next year will decide whether you can define marriages between a man and a woman for the purpose of federal law. And then you may have heard about this lawsuit out of California, in which the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has now said that the Proposition 8 in California violates the Constitution. That will be going to the Supreme Court too. So next year, who knows, the whole world may come together.
These cases are Roe versus Wade and...
On steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I say that is because Roe versus Wade sort of purported to define what human life is for purposes of constitutional law, very badly, I might add. Just badly as you read Roe versus Wade and you're like, huh? All right? But in the process, it overturned the laws of something like 43 or 46 different states. Right? So now the Supreme Court will have the opportunity to overturn all state marriage laws in the country, or at least those that haven't fallen in line already with the same-sex marriage agenda. It's pretty staggering. Staggering from the point of view of a court having the power to do something like that. Right? That would be, I'll talk about this later today, but I mean this, that would be far worse than the Obamacare decision that just came out. Because that decision, all that decision did is said, you bought it, people, you bought Obamacare, it's yours, right? If you want to reverse it, we have this little thing called an election, right? But that at least leaves people free to do something. A decision by the Supreme Court that mandated same-sex marriage would not leave anyone free to do anything. And it would be a grave threat to religious liberty, which is something that my organization doesn't take a position on gay marriage per se, but we do take a position that is a grave threat to religious liberty. Yes, sir.
Have you been an attempt by some of the states? I thought I read that it's trying to eliminate from the total marriage description, marriage laws, his and her, he and she, husband and wife, so that it's a kind of a gender-neutral description of marriage.
I don't know. That seems plausible to me. I can't tell you that I litigated a case. I used to be, before I was at Beckett, when I was the chief appellate person in Louisiana. And so we litigated for 2.5 years a lawsuit in which a same-sex couple who had adopted a child in New York, in this state, as a matter of fact, the child had been born in Louisiana, right? And so Louisiana had the birth certificate. And so the couple petitioned Louisiana to change the birth certificate so that you could put father and father as opposed to father and mother, right? And Louisiana said, well, no, we don't do that. Right? And so they got sued. And it fell to me to explain to a federal court that, look, what New York does with respect to parenting or adoption, great, whatever. New York is free to be as progressive as they like. But that can't be exported to Louisiana and force Louisiana to change public documents. from mother, father to father, father, or person one, person two, or whatever.
But I can tell you here in New York, since same-sex marriage was legalized a year ago, state regulators have already taken steps to neutralize language.
Yeah, I thought there was an executive order on that.
Well, that was before gay marriage was passed. But now that it has, for example, our marriage certificates from the state health department say spouse one and spouse two. It's kind of like the cat in the hat. Remember that? Thing one and thing two.
We won that case, by the way. But we had to go to the full Court of Appeals, and we won 11-5. And it seemed like a small thing to many people, but to the people of Louisiana, it wasn't a small thing to change those terms and change a public document. It seemed like forcing the citizens of Louisiana to say something contrary to what their law and Constitution said. And we didn't think the Constitution forced them to do it, and we were right for the time being.
Regarding, just to change a little bit, you gave a number of websites with information. Being that some of us aren't really computer savvy and there's time issues, Jonathan said, you can sit and read. Well, that's fine if you're a journalist and that's your job is to sit and read, but yeah. Are there any sites that you're aware of that will link you to a large number of those sites almost automatically? In other words, you don't want to do your carpentry if you're not a carpenter. There's commercials on TV. You don't want to medicate yourself if you're not a doctor. Here we have advantage of experts. Are there sites that we can go to which will link us to multiple other reliable sites without having to sit there spending days surfing and then judging which ones are good and which ones aren't good? Duncan Fund has been pretty good. I've been on that site several times throughout daily, not really daily, but write your congressman. I think I have a block on my computer address from our senators. But yeah, are there sites that...
I don't know if there are. And I don't know about them, so I don't go to them. But what I find is if I start going to sites that I trust, that are giving me good information, I end up being linked to other sites. They end up internally linking to other sites, and you get this kind of virtual community. So that's the best I can do. Jonathan talked about an aggregator site. Did you say Real Clear Politics?
Real Clear Politics.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but that's going to get you all over the place, I think.
Yeah, the problem is that when you start going to those other links, you get lost in another atmosphere, and then,
Right.
it's difficult. It is.
It sounds like you're going to be talking about this later, but I was just wondering, with all those lawsuits against HHS, how long will it take for them to bubble up through the system?
I'll talk about that later. The answer is it's very difficult to say. The reason it is because the administration is doing everything in its power right now to delay those lawsuits. You might, on the cynical side, you might say it's to get it past the election. If you believe what they're saying, it's because they're promising to fix it. That's my reaction to it as well. But I'll that one. Sorry.
There's probably nobody in this room that believes that one.
And that would include me. But I'll talk to you more in detail about what they're doing. There are some lawsuits, we're not handling them, there are some lawsuits on behalf of businesses. Most of the lawsuits are on behalf of nonprofits. Some are on behalf of businesses. For a technical reason, those businesses may be in a position to force a decision sooner rather than later. And so it's possible you might see a decision in the fall. But that would be at the lowest level. The idea that it would bubble up to the appellate courts and the Supreme Court, that takes some time. I mean, the Obamacare case started 2 years ago, and it actually went fairly quickly.
So, just playing out what would be for us one of the worst case scenarios. The administration stays intact,
right,
and the church and other religious organizations then will be forced to face the mandate without any relief from the possibility of those lawsuits.
Yes. So what I'll talk about later is there are basically 2 dates that one ought to have in mind. The first one is August 1st of this year. August 1st of this year is when the HHS mandate is effective, August 1st of this year. So unless you have some kind of exemption or some kind of delay, that's when your insurance policy is going to have to cover all FDA-approved contraceptives and sterilization methods, August 1st of this year. So, and if you got over 50 employees, if you've got 50 more employees, you have to provide health insurance for the employees. So you're in the dilemma of saying, well, if I provide it and comply with the law, then I'm violating my faith. So if I decide not to provide it, then I have to drop all my health. I have to drop employee health insurance. How's that going to help your relations with your employees? And on top of that, I'm going to have to pay about $2,000 per employee per year. So that's August 1st, 2012. If you are a religious nonprofit, and I'll explain this more later. So if you're a Catholic school that doesn't qualify for the exemption, which you wouldn't, the administration gave you an extra year to order your affairs, I don't know, to discover the invisible ink writing in the catechism or something. They gave you an additional year. And what they are saying is they're going to come up with a quote-unquote accommodation during that year. I'll talk about the details of that. I wouldn't put much over that. There are no details. Yeah, well, that's the other problem is there are no details. The details that have been given strike me as something out of a Disney, where someone takes a magic wand and waves it over a frog or something and turns it into a tree. In other words, they want the insurance companies to provide the contraceptive coverage directly to the employees and not charge money for it.
See, here in New York, we faced this contraception mandate in 2002 when our state legislature passed a Women's Health and Wellness Act and required insurance policies that cover drugs to also cover contraceptive drugs and devices. We obviously sued with a number of other religious organizations and tried every which way to get out of it and ultimately lost that battle. But I would argue that this is much, much worse because it's inescapable. Here in New York, there is no legal requirement to provide health insurance under New York state law. Now it's a legal mandate at the federal level, and you can't self-insure and get out of it. You can't go under ERISA and get out of it. There were ways for dioceses and other church agencies in New York State to escape the state mandate for contraceptive coverage. There are no escapes, as I see it, at the federal level.
That's
There's no escapes.
exactly right. And there's also a good reason why, even though that lawsuit failed, that does not mean that these current lawsuits will fail because it's a different legal landscape.
Yeah, let me just say that in terms of hope. We are the church, right? We're in the business of hope. That's our business, for gosh sakes. So we have to be hopeful about this legal strategy that Kyle and others are putting together. I mean, we have tried. Cardinal Dolan, I can speak on behalf of Cardinal Dolan. He has sat down with the president face to face. He has tried the executive route. He's been promised an accommodation that doesn't really exist except in Disneyland. That's not going to work. The executive branch is not going to work. We've tried the legislative route with the Blunt Amendment and the Rubio bill and other ways. It's not going to work, at least not as Congress is currently constituted. I don't see that working. Should we still advocate for that? Yes, but I don't see that working. I do put a lot of hope, however, in the legal strategy, which I see as being very clearly thought out and well placed across this country. I'm not an attorney, but I do follow law and I play one on TV. I think it's a very good legal strategy that has been put together, and I actually find some words of wisdom and hope in the recent Supreme Court decision on federal health care. So I think we should all be very hopeful about the legal strategy, and Kyle's not going to fail us.
And it doesn't depend on me. Should we are we out of time? Okay.
One more question, if someone who has not had a chance.
Yeah, can you just expand on why you think that the current ruling will help the HHS?
There was some language in the majority opinion and even in some minority opinion.
You're reading our press releases.
No, I read the 193
You read the
page
193.
decision.
I'm
I
not
did.
sure I believe it.
I absolutely did. I didn't understand some of it. I will admit that, but I did read it. And there's some language in there that clearly says we are not ruling here about other constitutional issues like freedom of speech and freedom of religion and whether there were violations there.
Yeah.
That's another day to come.
I'll quote it for you in my talk, but Justice Ginsburg actually has a statement where she says, of course, if a mandate to purchase a product violated the freedom of religion, then that would be unconstitutional.
See that? You just put hope into that book.
No, I don't think Justice Ginsburg. Just one more and then we'll...
Okay. Another important date, Election Day, that you didn't mention. I've heard, I haven't checked my sources or anything, but I heard that a number of the more conservative judges on the Supreme Court are interested in retiring.
Well, they're really old. I assume that when I'm that old, I'll be interested in retiring.
Well, what would happen if newly elected Obama were to appoint 2 or 3 more of his...
What do you think?
So that's an important date, that's my point.
Judicial appointments, this is coming from the General Counsel of an officially nonpartisan organization. Judicial appointments are really, really important in presidential elections. A lot of people don't realize that, but it's very, very important. Well, thanks.
Kathy,
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.